Major funding for Election 2022 Arkansas PBS Debates is provided by AARP Arkansas, with additional funding provided by the Arkansas State Chamber of Commerce.
From the campus of University of Central Arkansas and the studios of Arkansas PBS, it's Election 2022 Arkansas PBS Secretary of State Debate.
Stand by, Jim, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Up on Jim and cue Steve.
And hello again, everyone, and welcome to Debate Week here on Arkansas PBS. At this hour, the candidates for Secretary of State, and they are in alphabetical order. The Democratic nominee, Beth Gorman, and the Republican candidate and incumbent, John Thurston. Questions for the debate will come tonight from Brandon Evans from 4029 News, Fort Smith and Fayetteville, and Christina Munoz of Arkansas PBS and Natural State Update. I'm Steve Barnes. Rules for the debate have been agreed upon by both candidates, and in review, each will have 1 minute to respond to a question. The candidates will have 30 seconds for rebuttal or for expansion on an answer if they choose. At the conclusion of questioning, each candidate will have 1 minute for a closing statement. The order of candidate appearance was determined prior to the debate by a toss of a coin, which was overseen by the candidates or their representatives. Our first question will come from Brandon Evans, and it goes to Ms. Gorman.
Candidate Gorman, a lot was made about whether the 2020 election was free and fair. Do you believe it was? And if elected Secretary of State, what would you do to ensure that elections remain free and fair in Arkansas?
Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, PBS. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Steve. I'm very happy to be here today. And the short answer is yes. I believe that the 2020 election was a free, fair, and sound election, and I believe that President Joe Biden won the presidential election. And as sad as that day was, it taught Americans that we have to treat democracy as a fragile institution, that we have to work hard to ensure that it exists in the form that we want it to exist in. So, as Secretary of State, I'm going to work hard to ensure that all Arkansans are participating in the process. We have the lowest voter participation and turnout in the country, and that's a way to ensure election integrity is to change that statistic.
Thank you, Ms. Gorman. Mr. Thurston, 1 minute.
Well, that is the million-dollar question everyone's been asking for the past, 2 years? And I believe it's the same question that was asked when Hillary lost several years ago. So that concern and that fear has been among voters since the beginning of probably the first election, back when we just penciled in the name. The short answer is I positively 100% can tell you with certainty that I don't know. Because each state, according to the U.S. Constitution, shall run their own elections and certify those elections. So for me to say that a particular state did it perfectly, I can't say that. I can say here in Arkansas, during record turnout, a pandemic, no doubt, we had probably the safest and most secure elections in the country. In fact, Arkansas ranks, according to the National Heritage Foundation, ranks number 4 in the nation in the area of election integrity. And so I look forward to talking more about that because there's a lot we can say pertaining to especially the last presidential election.
Ms. Gorman, 30 seconds.
Well, I'm concerned to hear that we can't all agree about the 2020 election still and on stage with the individual who oversees elections in Arkansas. Yes, Arkansas has got integrity and we've had no voter fraud complaints, and again, went red, and so no one came after Arkansas in the 2020 election, but that could have been different. We saw the President of the United States go after members of his own party because they certified election. They did their job and he came after them. So we have to ensure that Secretary of States, in particular, once they're elected, act in the most nonpartisan way.
Mr. Thurston, 30 seconds.
So the reason that I can't say for certainty, I can tell you what the certification said, is because I'm not there. So it's definitely assuming too much for me to say that every state ran their election perfectly, because every state is, you would be shocked at how different each state is when it comes to their election laws and what they carry out. One state has voter ID, one state doesn't. One state's a vote by mail, all vote by mail. Another state is limited to absentee. So, but I definitely am very confident with what went on here in Arkansas.
Ms. Munoz has the next question, first for Mr. Thurston.
Thank you for Mr. Thurston. So there's no doubt that election integrity is incredibly important. So when it comes to a potential voter in Arkansas, are there too many hoops to jump through? Are the safeguards and protections just the right amount, or should there be even more?
So I tell people that you have to take ownership of your vote. Some states have an automatic voter registration. Here in Arkansas, you have to register to vote 30 days prior to the election that you want to vote in. That's what I mean by taking ownership of your vote. You do need to register. There is a lot of debate on some of the election laws passed here in Arkansas. In this past General Assembly, there were several. Some call it voter suppression, as if voter ID is somehow suppressing votes. But we do want it to be convenient. We do want it to be easy for people to vote, obviously, but also hard to cheat. And accuracy is more important than convenience, in my opinion, because elections, it is the bedrock of our republic.
Ms. Gorman.
Again, when you look at the statistics of us having the lowest voter participation and turnout, I would argue that we have made it extremely hard to access your fundamental right as an American to participate in the American election process, American democracy. There are things that we can do today that overnight would change that, things that have been tried and true in several other states. Online voter registration. Most Americans conduct their business through a tool in their pocket, their phone. We are making it extremely difficult in this day and age for Arkansans to access what truly makes America and American democracy different from any other country in the world. And on day one, I'm going to be addressing this. Again, if you're going to be judging the performance of this job, the first thing you should judge it by is how many people are participating in our elections.
Mr. Thurston, you have 30 seconds, sir.
So during the primary that we just had, and well, even the general election before that, we had record turnout and record participation. So I think we are seeing it trend up. Obviously, we should do a better job educating our young people, because I believe that's where we should be telling them first, when they're young, the importance of voting. Because once an individual is into their 60s and 70s, they're pretty well set. They're just not going to vote. But I do think we need to do a better job in educating our young people, and I hope we have time to talk more about that.
Ms. Gorman, 30 seconds.
I believe this office should be the Chief Civic Engagement Officer for the state of Arkansas. I absolutely agree that we should be talking to not just young populations, but all populations. We can look at data and look at who's not voting and can develop strategic strategies to address those populations and meet their needs, not expect them to come to us.
Thank you, Ms. Gorman. And a question for Ms. Gorman. You have indicated that you want to assist underserved communities and women. Is there something unique to the Office of Secretary of State? How can you do that with the Office of Secretary of State?
On the campaign trail, I talk about being an opportunity advocate. I've seen how opportunity transforms lives. I've seen how it's transformed the lives of women when you give them access to an opportunity that already exists. I look at this job as the position in statewide office that really has the most opportunity to help all Arkansans, not just women. Opportunity is a rising tide. It lifts us all up. So when I say that I want to work for women, I want to work for all of our communities. I want them participating in the election process because your voice is your vote, and that is important.
Mr. Thurston.
So we all wish we could do more. I mean, at every level. But when it comes kind of to back up into the previous question about participation, voter registration, and those sorts of things, as a constitutional officer, there's very little room for advocacy because your job description is set by the Constitution. It is set by state law. You don't get to define your job. And if you're going to do a outreach or a voter drive or try to get more people to participate, which group do you pick? And that's why it's a very fine line for the chief election officer to go to any particular group and encourage them to vote. Do I go to Northwest and we'll focus on that area? Do I go to the Delta? And so even though it does sound good, and I wish we could do more, it also takes resources to make sure you're doing it across the board and you're outreaching every Arkansan, encouraging them to register and to vote. So,
Ms. Gorman, 30 seconds.
I'm a successful CEO of a nonprofit. I know how to do a lot with a little. And I believe that you absolutely should expect your constitutional officers to be advocates. And I've done a lot of work with our existing constitutional officers, other state agencies, on creating programs and opportunities for all Arkansans.
Back to Mr. Thurston for another 30 seconds, sir.
I think you do advocate for people's rights. But again, I mean, back to the voter registration part, because I've heard this over the years, you know, increased voter turnout, increased voter registration. John, what does the Secretary of State do? Well, we do put an ad in a magazine that goes to every senior in high school that has an application on to register to vote. So at the very least, when they're a senior, they do have that opportunity. But you do have to be careful. What demographic, which part of the state, who do you encourage to vote? It kind of crosses the line.
All time, sir. Our next question, Mr. Evans.
For Secretary Thurston, when it comes to real ID laws, the Secretary of State's office will oversee the implementation of the new real ID laws when they are put into place in Arkansas in May of next year. How would your office make that transition for voters specifically go as smoothly as possible?
So, county clerks are the ones who really carry out elections. The county clerks, the election commissioners, poll workers, and even though the title Chief Election Officer is on the Secretary of State, a lot of folks think, well, you have a big stick. You must really have, you must run elections. When really it's done at the county level. And the reason that's good is because not only am I for states' rights, and I'm against federalizing elections, anytime there's some federal law that comes out to tell states how they are to run their elections, I oppose, because which ones do you pick? What if it's a federal law for voter ID? What if it's one to go vote by mail? So I think they should stay out. Likewise, you have to be cautious. We try not to go into counties and with that same approach and tell them how to do it. And so that's definitely something I think will probably have to be handled legislatively to make sure that process is in place.
1 minute for Ms. Gorman.
I understand how elections work in Arkansas. We have 75 counties, and you work with 75 county clerks and their staff. I've been going all over our state, meeting with counties, meeting with our different communities, and I'm hearing things from our county officers that are talking about their employees receive death threats for showing up to administer elections. So I don't think that it just falls on that county clerk to really ensure the safety and integrity of election law and laws that come up or passed from our legislature. I think that you are, as the chief election officer, responsible for acting as an effective administrator. And so you understand what that county needs, what resources they need to be successful in implementing what the legislator passes. That's what an effective administrator does, doesn't just pass it off to our county clerks. It's a coordinated effort.
Mr. Thurston, 30 seconds, sir.
So resources, I mean, just an example, when you talk about resources during the pandemic, which was the first time we'd ever had one during an election, and during the month of August prior to the presidential election, my office delivered PPE to all 75 counties. And of course, we have outreach teams, and we're in constant communication with the counties. So supporting them, I haven't had any county clerk to say otherwise. And so 30 seconds sure goes by fast.
Ms. Gorman, you have another 30 seconds.
Again, this is a coordinated effort. We have 75 counties, and they're very different. So they're going to have different needs. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It is an adaptive approach. And you can do this in a way, and you can be a resource partner to our counties.
Christina Munoz, for the next question, goes first to Mr. Gorman. Or Ms. Gorman,
Ms. Gorman, yes. Before these debates got underway this week, we gave an opportunity for viewers to participate by submitting questions via social media. So this next question comes from a viewer in Pulaski County. How will you bring people who do not agree with you to the conversation? This is important because you will be representing not your party and your supporters, but all of Arkansas. Ms. Gorman.
I've had a lot of practice at this. I'm an advocate for women. And sometimes when I walk in the room, that people don't want to talk just about women, right? So I have to find an opportunity of some project or an idea that we can work on together. And that's how you bring people together. And in the job that I have, I will say there are so many things that we can agree on, we can work on. It's just working to find that. So my organization, we've been extremely successful because we work with cross-section of stakeholders. We look for unlikely allies and we partner with them. You know, what I care about passionately, I can put that aside if there is something that we can collaborate on and really create good for all Arkansas.
We go to Mr. Thurston now for 1 minute, sir.
I mean, that is important because we are Americans at the end of the day. And we get so caught up in sometimes really the smallest of things. But I do want to encourage listeners today that here in Arkansas, don't think that Arkansas politics or what goes on in the Capitol is what you see on Fox and CNN, because we are much more cordial and we get along a whole lot better up there in that building than what people realize. We do disagree on some things, but I do want to encourage people with that and to think that one individual has all the authority and power to change the world or change. The Founding Fathers designed this government so that there is not one person that can change. There are separation of powers. You do have to work together. And so we would not be where we are at this point in history if there was not compromise and working together. So I do want to encourage folks. We are not quite as divided as maybe cable news depicts.
So back to Ms. Gorman now for 30 seconds.
I agree with John. That is not how everyday Arkansans behave. That's not. We're a small state. We are 1 degree of separation from knowing your cousin. Absolutely. I've run into multiple of John's cousins on the campaign trail, literally. And again, to get things done in our state, we've got a lot of people working on good things, and we're collaborating every day. It's not going to be an issue. Not in this job. That should be the most nonpartisan of all the constitutional offices.
And Mr. Thurston?
I agree.
Question now for Ms. Thurston, I think. Yes. Mr. Thurston, both of you have some extensive experience, according to your resumes and your job performance, with cyberspace and particularly cybersecurity. What can you tell Arkansans about the state of the documents, the records that are entrusted to the Secretary of State, and how can they be improved? Are we liable to hacking right now?
I don't think anyone can say that it is impossible to be hacked. I mean, no one can say that for certainty. I am very confident, and I will say this, that when I was first elected, all the conversation was around cybersecurity, cyber attack, Russian interference. And so for the first time in state history, we had the FBI and the Department of Homeland on site at the Capitol on election night, and they will be there again this election night to help keep, and they'll be in communication with their counterparts across the nation in the event there is a cyber attack. We also, for the first time, we have a cybersecurity specialist on staff. And so we've put in some safeguards, and of course we're constantly sending our people to be more educated. And I'm actually on the cybersecurity council or board committee, I should say, committee with the National Associations of Secretary of State. So there's a lot of collaboration and work that goes in on making sure something really, really bad doesn't happen.
Ms. Gorman, you have 1 minute.
Steve, as you mentioned, I was appointed to serve by Asa Hutchinson, Governor Asa Hutchinson, to serve as a commissioner for the Computer Science and Cybersecurity Task Force. I advocate for computer science education across our state. I've learned a lot about computer science and cybersecurity, and what I would say is that we have to always be vigilant because technology is ever changing. So records today might be safe, but that doesn't mean that there's not going to be new technology or new efforts from bad actors tomorrow. So we just have to be vigilant. So I'm excited to hear about that we've got a full-time position, and I would intend to improve upon that position and continue to see it forward.
Oh, Mr. Thurston, back to you for 30 seconds.
Sure, it is very important. It's a changing world, and there's a lot of bad actors out there. And the cyber world, we're no longer, being attacked, if you will, by someone with a gun crossing our border. They are literally, trying to get into our systems here. And what better system than to hack something that has to do with elections? And so, yes, we have to constantly be mindful of that.
All right. Ms. Gorman, 30 seconds.
No further comment.
All right, at this point, we want to let the audience know, everyone know, that the candidates can participate in a press conference here directly following the debate. Now, to watch at home, scan the QR code on your screen with your mobile device. You will see that QR code periodically throughout the balance of our debate. And with that, our next question comes from Mr. Evans, and it goes first to Ms. Gorman.
Candidate Gorman, so I want to talk about business now because the Secretary of State's office does have the Business and Commercial Services Division and the Business Office. So how, as Secretary of State, would you help businesses and business owners in Arkansas?
Thank you, Brandon, for this question. I'm very passionate about the business economy, specifically the small business economy. I am currently the chairman of the North Little Rock Chamber of Commerce. In my day job, I've worked very closely with female entrepreneurs across our state, helping understand how their business can become a true vehicle of economic mobility. And what I've learned is that the Secretary of State plays a very vital role as the incubator to business in Arkansas. The first place that you have to go is the Secretary of State's website to register your business. And if you are not in good standing with the Secretary of State, a bank will not give you a loan. And unfortunately, currently, if you call a bank and say, I'm looking to get a loan, they're gonna look you up on the Secretary of State's website, and if you're not in good standing, they'll just tell you no, they won't tell you why. So I absolutely intend to really focus a lot of attention on this seldomly talked about, but very important aspect of the Secretary of State's job.
Mr. Thurston, 1 minute.
It is a very important function of the office. When I took office 3.5 years ago, one of the needs that I saw was Northwest. 40% of the growth in Arkansas in the realm of commerce and business goes on in Northwest Arkansas. That's 40%. And so we created the first ever Secretary of State satellite office, if you will, that handles business commercial service issues that they may have to deal with. Also, during my first term, we had 50,000 new businesses / entities, corporations, nonprofits, and so forth start up. And our office takes around 400 calls a day. So it's a very, very busy office. And I have just a couple of minutes. And also during the pandemic, the PPP loans that were available to small businesses, they had to call our office and get their status of, that they were active and articles of incorporation and so forth. And we served around 20,000 of those during that time. And so,
Got a call. I've got a call time.
Very important function.
Yeah, and we go to Ms. Gorman.
I think this is an area where we've got to improve. I looked yesterday on the business service tab. The first thing you click when you says new business is basically due to a staffing shortage, you're going to experience customer service delays. Nothing about that or our website currently makes this an easy place to do business in Arkansas. We've got to improve it.
Another 30 seconds for Mr. Thurston.
Well, 30 seconds. It's 50,000 new entities in the last 3.5 years, and we're growing. And we have very little complaints personally, and most lawyers and those who start businesses, many across the state have my cell number and they know they can call me. And so we definitely respond to any needs immediately. So.
And Ms. Munoz has the next question. It goes first to Mr. Thurston.
So we've talked a lot about the office and the duties, as well as increasing voter turnout, voter registrations. But what criteria would you use as Secretary of State to evaluate your performance in that office?
When I was Commissioner of State Lands for 8 years and ran for this office, and how I look at a constitutional office is you first look at your statutory responsibility. I mentioned you don't get to set the job description. And the main thing that you do is you make sure you're fulfilling that statutory responsibility, period. You don't get to go off into other lanes of government and dabble with. And so I think the way to measure that is to make sure that you're doing that, fulfilling your obligation statutorily. And you do it with great customer service as well, because we're in the people business. I mean, the tentacles of the Secretary of State touch so many lives, whether it's elections, BCS, the Capitol grounds, the security, all the monuments, the restoration projects of that building that's going on constantly. And so I think that's how you measure. You have to look at the laws and make sure that the public are taken care of.
Ms. Gorman, 1 minute.
I deal in data and figures. I think it's a simple way to evaluate job performance. Again, I'm a CEO of an organization, and I get evaluated every year, not just every 4 years. Every year I get evaluated, and we look at very specific metrics. There are some big metrics with this job: voter participation, voter turnout, the number of businesses. Why is 50 the threshold, 50,000? Why isn't it 100,000? Let's put those numbers on a board. Let's see us go from the bottom of a national list in voter engagement to the top. If you go around the state, people cannot tell you the name of the Secretary of State. I want people to know who the Secretary of State is, hold them accountable for their job, and I want this office to really fulfill its constitutional mandated responsibilities. I think all our Kansans want, where their taxpayer dollars go, to know that someone is working not just to check a box, but to exceed expectations.
Mr. Thurston, 30 seconds.
It is a public office, and anyone in the state can obviously find us and reach out. And we also have 135 legislatures that keep a close eye on my job performance as well. And so it's been an honor, and it's gone really well. Nothing's broken. That's the reason we're having a really hard time today finding something that hasn't been fulfilled or accomplished or statutorily where the ball's been dropped, because it has been a great first term.
All right, and back to Ms. Gorman.
I think that I've clearly pointed out, and I'm inviting Arkansas voters to look, though you can see where we're not delivering on this office. Worst voter participation in the country, a website that isn't working. In red letters, we're having customer service issues. I've gone around the state, I've met with professional service firms, lawyers, I've met with entrepreneur support organizations. They are extremely frustrated with the lack of support they're getting from the Secretary of State's office.
Question now for Ms. Gorman. Executive power in Arkansas state government is legendarily diffuse. In the interest of efficiency, economy, would you support a proposal that would consolidate some of the independent offices, say Secretary of State, Auditor, Treasurer, Land Commissioner?
Well, that's a great question, and one that I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about. I believe in checks and balances in our government, and I believe, John just talked about, this is a really big job, the Secretary of State. It, to me, in my opinion, is one of the biggest jobs. I mean, it is elections, it's business support services, it's the state capitol grounds itself, it's the Capitol Police Force. If you're telling me that you think that we need to consolidate more offices, then I'm going to tell Arkansans, like, you're going to get what you pay for. You're not going to get a lot. I think that we want professional constitutional officers that can do a really good job. So give them the opportunity to do a good job.
Mr. Thurston.
That's right. When I became land commissioner, there was talk of making it an unelected position and consolidating and so forth. The good part about having an elected official is we're coming up on a term that's ending, and the public will have the opportunity to cancel my contract or extend it for another term. When there is an office that's led by an appointment or something, or it's buried under bureaucracy, it is very, very hard for the public to have a say on who runs that particular agency or office. And so perhaps there's some consolidation out there that may be needed. I can't think of it off the top of my head, but certainly the Secretary of State needs to stand alone as a constitutional office.
Ms. Gorman, 30 seconds.
I'll just say that I'm all about efficiency and trying to save taxpayer dollars, but we can work smarter and not harder and get a good job done.
Mr. Thurston, 30 to you.
I'm good, thank you.
Next question then is from Mr. Evans, and it goes first to Mr. Thurston.
So I want to kind of springboard off Steve's question, talking about the different divisions of the Secretary of State's office. We talked about business, but as she mentioned, Capitol Facilities, Capitol Police, there's also communications and education. Which of these divisions that falls under the Secretary of State's purview do you feel like has the most room for improvement?
Boy, that is a great question. In the world that we're in today, security is so important. The security of that building. That building is a museum. It's an event center. There are events there almost every single day, sometimes multiple events. School children come there. Our it's an office building. There's business that goes on there. And so we can always do a better job in the securing of that building. Now, we have increased our officers by 10. There's way more surveillance. Our officers have been trained like never before because of the protest that we had a couple of years ago. And so we had to really look in different ways to beef up that particular area. But because the world is changing, there will always be room to improve that area as the security of that building.
Ms. Gorman, 1 minute.
The state capitol is the front door to Arkansas, so I'm excited about the opportunity to really get to manage that facility. But when you ask the question about which area needs improvement, well, the answer is all of them. There's a need for constant improvement. John said that. But we have to look at really where we're failing currently. And again, I think that we've got to address voter participation. Business support services has got to be addressed in Arkansas. I tell people this all the time, and I really believe this. The next Sam Walton lives in Arkansas. She might live right here in Conway, but she cannot navigate our current website. And that's not going to happen on my watch.
Mr. Thurston, 30 seconds, sir.
That's true. I mean, because of the changing world and technology changes at a rapid pace, I suppose every division will there's always room to improve. Tomorrow there'll be something more that we need to be doing. But because elections, in my opinion, elections, the Capitol Police, BCS, there's really no way to say which one is more important. And so, but just based on the question, the way it was framed, my mind goes to the security of lives when they're there at that Capitol. And so,
Ms. Gorman, 30 seconds.
Well, I really appreciate John pointing that out, because unfortunately we've now seen historically what happens when that House of Government can be attacked. So I'm going to agree with him on that, and that's something that, again, if you didn't recognize and appreciate the Capitol Police Force, that's an important agency within the Secretary of State, and I'm excited to serve it.
Ms. Munoz has the next question.
So, Ms. Gorman, you have already addressed this question, but because it is a viewer question, we want to be sure to get it in and get both of you to respond to it. This question comes from a viewer in Garland County. Should Arkansas have online voter registration? We are one of 4 states that does not allow online voter registration. Ms. Gorman, to you first.
I think that we are one of 11 states that doesn't have online voter registration, and John might actually be able to better answer that than me. But yes, we're in the minority of states that doesn't have it. I'm absolutely in favor of that. Of course, a legislator has to carry that piece of legislation. What's great is that, it was introduced a couple sessions ago. It was introduced by a young Girl Scout working with her representative senator from Fort Smith, Arkansas. She did the hard work and she did the research. She worked with the Secretary of State's office, but she got letters of support from comparable states, other southern states, about this is working for us. And this is low-hanging fruit. This is low-hanging fruit to overnight change voter participation. And again, we live in a society where we do everything on our phone. Why aren't we providing this access to Arkansans right now?
John Thurston, 1 minute.
I am not in opposition to online voter registration. My good friend in Alabama, Secretary, they have successfully pulled it off there, and they have seen an increase in voter registration. It is completely a legislative issue, completely. Because there's other laws that have to be changed before you could implement that. One, meaning you have to have a wet signature in registering to vote. And so there's other things that need to go on before that takes place. But if done correctly, yes, I think it would be convenient and a good thing. But again, the General Assembly definitely holds that power to make those decisions.
For a follow-up, Ms. Gorman, you have 30 seconds.
And I would try to work with the General Assembly on that. I think it's important. I think, the Secretary of State does have to speak out and up for innovation, automation, access. This creates transparency. It's a cost-saving mechanism. It is a physical cost for paper registration. This is going to save Arkansans taxpayer dollars. It's going to help Arkansans participate in the most American thing, voting in elections.
Mr. Thurston, another 30 seconds if you wish.
I think I'm good.
Then a question for Mr. Thurston then. What separates you from your opponent? Obviously, you are a Republican, Ms. Gorman is a Democrat, but are the differences largely ideological, or do they involve the mechanics of the Secretary of State's office? What separates the two of you?
Honestly, I don't know. I've just gotten to know her just in recent months and haven't really had a chance. And this is really our first, I guess there was a primary debate that went on. I guess you would have to maybe start off at the party platforms. That might tell you a little bit of our differences if you looked at those two platforms, because we both, I think, agree with our platforms. And also, I guess, the experience in running a constitutional office, not to discredit anyone's experience in life or resume, but I have successfully run a constitutional office. And maybe there's a reason no one has heard of the Secretary of State in Arkansas, because I've done a good job. There's a reason that I haven't been in the headlines, at least not very many times. And so, but because I can't articulate and know for certainly the main differences, I would say the platform and also the experience in actually running a constitutional office.
Same question to Ms. Gorman.
I'm the CEO of a nonprofit, a statewide nonprofit. I've been working across the state for 14 years. I'm a recognized nonprofit leader. I'm a business advocate. I'm the wife of a Marine combat veteran. It's true, John and I haven't spent a lot of time together, but I think that probably we have some similar values when it comes to how we believe that people should be treated and how we treat each other, and we campaign. I've noticed that we have a similarity. Our differences are just, it is life experiences, it is approach to the job. I believe in really amplifying the voices of others. I believe that if you have the opportunity, and if you are given an opportunity to be a constitutional officer, then It is your charge to speak for the Arkansans that aren't able to speak for themselves.
Mr. Thurston, 30 seconds.
Well, it has been an absolute honor, and I'm sure we're getting close to time. I want to make sure I at least take these 30 seconds to tell Arkansans this, that I've been an Arkansan my whole life. And the one thing that when I was elected that I did not ever want to do to you, Arkansas, is bring reproach to you. And so, I know it sounds corny, but I love Arkansas, I love you, and at the end of the day, we are running for this office, I think, to serve Arkansans.
Ms. Gorman, another 30 seconds.
I'm raising my family in Arkansas because I believe it is the land of opportunity. I believe that all Arkansans have a voice, and the best way to exercise that voice is to participate in the American democracy right here in our great state. And I'm asking for your support this November.
Mr. Evans has the next question. It goes first to Ms. Gorman.
So I would like to talk about something in the news recently involving this election cycle when it comes to the recreational marijuana initiative. There was a back and forth between the Secretary of State's office where they declared the recreational marijuana amendment's ballot title insufficient. It was eventually overturned by the state Supreme Court. How do you feel that situation was handled, and how, if elected, would you handle similar situations like that?
Again, the role of Secretary of State it should be a nonpartisan, arbiter of how we get things on the ballot. Again, there's a lot of role of the legislative body involved, and they put a lot of laws in place. We kind of have to manage that process. This is issue 4 is a hotbed issue, but I trust Arkansans. I trust them to make the decision for our state. And so I would be very careful as Secretary of State that although I'm running on a party platform and I'm a proud Democrat, once elected, I become the Secretary of State for all of Arkansas. And so if a group of legislators have done the work, the hard work to get that issue on the ballot, then I'm going to do my job. And I'm not going to let my personal feelings on an issue one or the other shade or influence the role that I have, which is to ensure that we can get things on the ballot.
Mr. Thurston, 1 minute, sir.
So the signatures were, verified and approved and certified by my office. They had the proper amount of signatures. Also, when the ballot title went to the state board, which everyone knows the Supreme Court deemed that unconstitutional, that the state board would approve a ballot title. I personally don't totally get that, but and I chair that board. It was unanimous that that ballot title was deceiving. Unanimous. Democrat representative, Republican representative, the whole entire board. I did not vote on that particular, on that. I was chairing and I was going to an event, there was a tie, but did not. Personally, I'm voting against it. I have some libertarian leaning. I'm all for decriminalizing marijuana. However, if you read that bill, or not bill, but that amendment, it has not just some barriers of entry, it is a complete barrier of entry. It is the opposite of the free market when you look at that particular amendment.
Got it there, and we go back to Ms. Gorman.
Again, and John and I both have our personal feelings, and we're going to vote how we're going to vote. I'm going to vote in favor, again, because I believe that recreational marijuana is a step in the right direction, and it's coming. The train has left the station, right? It is coming. Is it perfect? It's written? No. The great thing is that we have a way to change the process, to change the language. It's hard, but we can do it. So again, I'm going to put faith and trust in Arkansans, but I'm going to stop short of putting my personal feelings on the process. That's not the role of the Secretary of State. That is not the role of this constitutional office.
Well, Mr. Thurston, you have another 30 seconds.
That is true, and I obviously have not done that in this whole entire process. But I just want to point this out because this amendment, and I'm sure she'll get campaign contributions after I say this, but this amendment is not as clear as people think. It is not free market. It does create barriers of entry, and it does create a drug cartel. period. Whether the social issue of marijuana, whatever you think of that, that is separate. It could be bubble guppies or pineapples that we're talking about.
Got a call time, Mr. Thurston. Thank you. And so I can remind our audience once again that the candidates are going to be participating in a press conference, or certainly can, directly following the debate, and you can watch at home live. Scan the QR code on your screen with your mobile device, and we'll throw that up again. You'll see that QR code periodically through the remainder of our debate. We have another question, Ms. Munoz, and it goes first to Mr. Thurston.
Yes, and Mr. Thurston, you've already touched on this a little bit with regard to federal regulation on states with regards to elections. So how have federal regulations like the National Voter Registration Act and the Help America Vote Act impacted Arkansas? And what do you believe the role of the federal government is with regard to state elections?
So the federal government does set dates and so forth. You need timelines, obviously. When you're dealing with overseas ballots, you're dealing with our veterans, there needs to be some federal guidelines. But there's also been legislation, H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, which was leftist, I call it Californianizing, California way of elections. Is basically what it was, doing away with voter ID, going to vote by mail, drop boxes, which I'm 100% against, which when you talk about the last presidential election, whether it was stolen or not, every election official across this nation will agree that vote by mail and the drop boxes opens the door to election fraud. Whether it happened or not, obviously, evidence, I guess, has not been presented, at least hasn't been presented to the right courts. But that's where I draw the line when it comes to federal overreach.
Ms. Gorman.
You know, I think when the federal government gets involved, is it trying to solve a problem, or is it creating a bigger problem? Right? I believe in our state and our ability to manage and oversee our own elections. We talked about our 75 county clerks and the good people in the communities across our state that are doing a good job. But again, I think that when it comes to the National Voting Rights Act and those things, it's historically because we've had voter disenfranchisement, right? I mean, we have to create access to the most fundamental thing, being an American. That's participating in our democracy. You know, I'm married to a combat veteran, you know, and we take voting very seriously. It is an emotional act for us. My husband served in Iraq with Ukrainian forces. He literally served with men and women that understand how fragile democracy is. And we have got to ensure that there are safeguards to accessing this fundamental right that makes our country great.
Back to Mr. Thurston for 30 seconds.
Her bringing up veterans it is so important. If you do nothing else but vote in honor of our veterans, I mean, that's why you should vote. That's why you should participate. Because veterans and their families pay a great price, and some the ultimate price, so that we can live in this country and vote. And so obviously it's too late to register to vote for this election, but just out of honoring our veterans, encourage you to participate in this process.
Thank you, sir. A question now for, Ms. Gorman, we go back to you. I'm sorry.
I just would really quickly say that I agree with John. You know, I've been telling people on the trail, like, people like to wave American flags to show patriotism. Most patriotic thing you can do is exercise your right to vote. And it's because someone fought for that right.
Now a question for Ms. Gorman, or starting with Ms. Gorman. You have seemed to suggest in the debate that the office should be more of a bully pulpit, and that the occupant, the Secretary of State, could be more of an advocate. Is not, though, the office, and Mr. Thurston has seemed to suggest that it is essentially a housekeeping, a bookkeeping office, if you will. Your response.
I hope I didn't intend to think that I should be a bully, but I absolutely think it should be an opportunity advocate. I absolutely think that. I think that you want to feel a great deal of confidence in your constitutional officer that has this very important responsibility. So Yes, I want to stress that, but I think that there's a way to do it that, first and foremost, on November the 9th, I hope that the individual in this office, and I hope that it's me, I hope that they behave in a way that is not reflective of partisan. I absolutely believe that American democracy is more important than the letter by your name.
Mr. Thurston.
Well, I think the question was kind of directed toward her, so I'm not sure how to actually answer it, but there are times to speak out. I mean, there are times to use the bully pulpit. One example was during COVID, a lot of these states changed their election laws in the name of safety. Well, here in Arkansas, there was a lawsuit that was filed that basically radically changed our elections. It had everything in that, doing away with voter ID, drop boxes, all those things in the name of safety, in the name of COVID. And I released a statement that's saying that I felt like our absentee process, our systems, was adequate enough to accommodate anyone during this time of this pandemic. And the judge threw that lawsuit out of court based upon that. So there are times you do speak up. You just don't sit there behind the desk and make sure the grass is mowed and the light bulbs are changed. There are times to speak out, but you do have to be mindful of when that timing is.
Ms. Gorman, 30 seconds.
As an advocate, I won't be bullied. I think that that's the true concern with Secretary of State's offices. For years, they've flown under the radar, but have always served critical functions in state government. But the concern now is that there are bully pulpits out there attempting to influence this office. And so what I am saying is let's really educate and empower what the office does and talk about what the office does and how the individual holding that office should be held accountable and how they should do their job every single day.
Another 30 seconds for Mr. Thurston.
Can't think of anything to add.
All right. We have reached that point in the debate where we have afforded each of our candidates 30 seconds for a closing statement. And that's 1 minute each. And our first closing statement is from Ms. Gorman.
Again, I want to thank PBS, Arkansas PBS, thank our moderators today. I want to thank Secretary John Thurston for his time. American democracy is fragile. We have to engage with it. We have to, as Arkansans, come from the middle, work with all of our communities to strengthen our democracy. Come November 8th, I'm asking for your vote and your support because I believe I can do this job. I can do it well, and I'll do it well for you, for all Arkansans. My name is Beth Gorman. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Gorman. Mr. Thurston.
Thank you, PBS moderators, for taking your time, and thank you for watching and being more informed about the candidates in this next election. I've been in legislative battles. I've been in battles with the other side of the aisle. I've been in battles with my own party. I've been in legal battles, all sorts of battles during my time as Secretary of State. But the one individual or the one group or entity that I have not battled is you, Arkansans. Everything I've done from day one has been with you in mind. Have I done it all perfectly? Probably not. But my heart has always been to serve you at the highest level of integrity that any individual can possibly serve at. And I'm asking for your vote to allow me one more term as Secretary of State. Thank you so much.
To both of our candidates, our thanks. We wish we could stretch the clock, but we are unable to do so. We would like to remind our audience that you can watch this debate again and all the PBS debates on demand at the Arkansas PBS YouTube channel or on the PBS video app and, of course, on our website. The candidates have, as we mentioned earlier, the option to participate at a press conference that directly follows this broadcast. Those press conferences will air on YouTube as part of our live stream. Scan the QR code on your screen and start watching on YouTube now. Again, our thanks to the candidates.